Good afternoon, everybody. This is take 2 for today because I did start making one earlier this morning, and then when I reviewed it, it didn't make any sense at all. I was referring to my dehydrator as the tumble dryer, so I thought I'd spare you the confusion and start again when I got another chance. Now I'm taking the chance. Just to update you on what I have actually been doing, because I've not posted any videos since Monday or Tuesday, I think. And I have been exceptionally busy, so you haven't heard from me, but I have been getting stuff done. And particularly over this week, I had done work in the garden. I cut the lawn, did some tidying up, watering of stuff under cover, prune stuff back. What else did I do in the garden? Oh yeah, emptied out the overflowing water butts in the rain that we had. I did some clearing out in the living room of one of the bookcases and sorting out. I've been painting crafts. The usual running around with family and helping out where we can. Babysitting. And yesterday, particularly, I did some preserving. So what I did was, all those tomatoes, the ripe tomatoes I did in the bucket, and a whole tray full from outside. All the ripe ones. Well, the red ones I chopped up, and it filled this entire plastic tub this high, so about another 2 to 3 inches higher than the top of the bowl. It piled up in the middle, and that all has condensed after 24 hours of drying into one jar of dried tomatoes. So it was very nice to see when they were dried. Now they were absolutely papery crunchy, then I knew they would dry properly. So I hope they'll last for at least a couple of months, although that amount I'm sure I'd use very easily and very quickly. But it just demonstrates how when you're trying to put things away and save them or preserve them for use later, dehydrating, if you can, is a good way to go, because it saves a lot of space. I mean, that amount of tomatoes frozen would have taken up quite a lot of space in the freezer, whereas this, I just have to find the space for a jar on a shelf. So it makes more sense to dehydrate things that can be dehydrated. Obviously there are things I'd like to keep fresh and frozen, so those are prioritized, the things that I want the most done like that. But anything else, I think I'll try to dehydrate more things in future. The yellow tomatoes, the yellow pears, I did make jam with, and I know it's not yellow because in there are the false quinces as well, 1 apple and a handful of aronia berries from the bush that I missed when I picked them before. So that's a bit of a mixed jam there. I used some of the baby food jars that I kept because they're smaller portions, and the bigger jars that you normally get in the shops with jams I think are just too much. You don't get to use a whole jam unless you eat a lot of jam. You just don't eat, and we don't. So to have one jar sat in the fridge and going moldy eventually is such a waste. And I think as part of the zero waste journey, I think I'm going to go for smaller portions of things that will use up quicker rather than end up throwing away because it goes bad, because we don't eat that much of it. But I do like to have some jam, and tomato jam might sound weird, but if you try tomato with sweet things, you will find it's not actually that bad. It's perfectly good for sweet and savory. And we grew up in South Africa eating tomato jam manufactured, bought from the shops, so it was nice to use some of them. And the yellow pears are a milder flavor anyway, but they're very tasty. So yeah, I've got jam to last me there 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months. That is 6 months worth of jam, believe it or not. So that's plenty there. I would have preferred raspberry. Raspberry is my absolute favorite jam. Maybe next year we'll have enough raspberries. Okay, so that's the tomatoes dealt with. Move that out the way. The vinegar, do you remember the vinegar I made a couple of months ago? Well, I had the lid on properly, like that, in the corner, and I tested it the other, you can just see there, look, it's getting bubbles again, so it's not finished fermenting. So what I did was I thought I just put a cloth back on the top to allow the gases to escape and keep the little fruit flies out. So I'm leaving that ferment more. These ones are ready to strain out and put into jars because they're not bubbling so much anymore, but I will have to remember to burp them and check them every now and again to make sure they really are turning into vinegar. I'll have to get some acid testing strips. This is my amaranth. Remember the laundry basket, that size laundry basket that I had full of flowers? Well, that's what came out of them. There was a bit more, but they obviously, some blew out and fell on the floor as I was sorting out, and it took me about an hour. When I sat down, it took me about an hour, and I figured out a way of getting them out quicker and easier from the flowers. So I'll share that with you another time, because I have some more on the bushes. I hope they don't rot. I have put inside some bay leaves and a rooibos tea bag, because if I was thinking that one of the old-fashioned tricks of keeping your biscuits from going soggy in the biscuit tin is to put a tea bag in them, and I thought, well, if it helps, I would do that with my dry food storage. Put a rooibos tea bag in there, because we don't drink normal tea anyway, but I'm sure that will do the same thing. And since I'm not going to go buy a bunch of deoxygenating sachets for my dry food storage, because you have to have enough dry food storage to put them in ready, because as soon as you open it they start to absorb the oxygen. So you have to either take one out and immediately vacuum seal the bag again, or use it all up in one go, put them all in jars immediately. And I'm not going to go through that because I wouldn't like any accidents if the little one got hold of any of those sachets. I'm not going to have them in the house because she's already opening drawers and things, and I don't want any accidents with that. So I'll just stick with the tea bags. And the bay leaves apparently help to keep those tiny little, the really tiny little moth type fly little things you can sometimes get in your flour and things like that, the little weevils as well. Apparently dried bay leaves in all your grains helps to keep them at bay. So I thought, well, if it works for grains, surely it should help for any of the dried food, because I have in the past found them in my bags of lentils and ruined that. So I will put bay leaves in all of my dry food storage. I have not put any in here yet. These are the cobra beans that I dried, and these ones are the Cherokee Trail of Tears. I still have enough drying to more than half fill that jar up to about there where my thumb is. That's not properly dry yet. The pods are still needing to dry. There's some on there, and as much again outside. They will have to come indoors to dry properly because it's too damp out there now. But yeah, they are slightly different, the beans. They're slightly different in shape and size. These more uniform and kidney shaped than the others, and slightly bigger. But I will make sure I keep a few out to grow for next year. But I think next year I'm just going to grow one variety of beans. I think I am going to go for the borlotti beans, because they're dual purpose, both for the pods and for the beans. So I think if I just grow a bunch of them, that'll be great. Then I don't need as much space for different beans, just one lot, and that'll be better for space saving. What else? The vinegars, the tomato, the amaranth. Oh, this jar, very precious jar of gold, literally worth gold, is the honey that I had from a friend who's the beekeeper that I mentioned before, from whom we buy our wax. So this is a very local honey. We know the beekeeper, we know how he looks after his bees, and he's a lovely guy. So we will treat that honey as a precious treasure, knowing what it takes for bees to make one jar of honey. So we'll make sure we treasure that, and I will use it next year to help prepare us just to ward off some hay fever, because we do tend to get extreme hay fever in our family. But and let's hope we can therefore avoid the prescribed medication you know, so there, that's that one. Oh, and also I made some nettle and comfrey oil, comfrey and the nettle seeds with a few nettle leaves, because they are very good for joints and sore muscles, as far as pain goes. And I also made some oil with the kaluna or heather in it, going on a recipe I found in the Permaculture magazine for making a balm. So these oils, this will sit for at least another 3 weeks, and hopefully I just turn it over every couple of days so that the oil mixes through the flowers properly. And I will also then get the shea butter I need and be ready in at least a month to make some pain relieving rub with essential oils as well. So we'll see how that goes. So that's part of my homemade first aid kit, just to avoid going to the doctors as often. We don't like going to the doctors, but if it's just general health things like that, then sure, we can do that ourselves. I would always use a doctor for serious stuff though. My aloe vera, that's desperate for transplanting and separating out, because there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 plants in there. So that's another little first aid plant I've got at home that needs careful use. Don't use, there's an outer layer just under the skin, and then you've got the inside gel. Do not use that outer layer on the skin, it's irritant. Cut out that layer of the skin to get to the inner pith. Okay. Oh yeah, my trimmings, the haircut I gave the time that I sewed was looking leggy, so that will be dried and then crushed into the small jar. The basil trimmings I will chop up and freeze in an ice cube tray. That's about it for there. Oh, and I made cookies this morning. I have not made cookies for years, but I was determined not to run to the shops and buy cookies that have far more ingredients than just the 4 I had in here. And one of those ingredients was just vanilla seeds. The others is just flour, sugar and margarine. So I know what's in there. Not good, still to be had in moderation, because there's the margarine and the sugar in there. However, I know what went in them. I made them, and I'm happy that we could. I'll have to hide them, of course, because certain little fingers will find them and thinks they're delicious. So I haven't had them for years. I haven't made them, so I'm not feeling too guilty about making a batch of cookies at all. So I'm pretty glad about that. I also did, among sorting some of this preserving and thinking about, I don't want to take too much longer, we're at 13 minutes already, but I did some thinking about, we mentioned about winter preparations and then preparing for a little bit further into next year, just in cases. And I was thinking about if there was about 2 months where we didn't have any money at all or any access to stuff, and I made a list. I thought best to make a list because I didn't know where to start thinking about this, because preserving and saving things and make do amend have always been a part of the things that we do, but I've never actually sat down and thought what if, and are we prepared for what if. I've prepared for thinking about what ifs and thinking I need to do things for the what ifs, but I've not actually got things carried out. I've got them planned but not carried out. So I wrote down the things what I really would miss the most if I didn't have any money for about 2 months. And I thought the thing that I would miss the most would be the safety net, the backup, that I know if I had money I could, if anything popped up in an emergency, it's okay, I could get whatever's needed, like the medicine in an emergency or something like that. That we got over the counter and then we couldn't get to the doctors for, because obviously we could still, I'm sure, get prescription stuff maybe, but as far as like the cold remedies or stuff like that, it would be the ability to go and get something you need instead of having to make it yourself, because that takes a lot of time, and having the raw ingredients in the house. So I would miss the safety net. And the next thing I would miss, I think, is a biggie for our family, because I do a lot of driving around after my family and a lot of service in helping them, and it does usually always involve the need of the car. So the fuel, I would miss the fuel and being able to help my family when they needed it the most. But it might be a good thing if we did have to go without using the car, because I wouldn't be able to afford the fuel, which is now getting more and more expensive in the last, well, all of this year actually. The price has been creeping up slowly, but it is more and more so now, getting quite ridiculous. So we need to anyway think about using the car less, and possibly putting our family's self-reliance for themselves ahead of our own, even to make sure that there'll be less burden on us if things went wrong. I would also miss being able to cook and bake when I please, although I haven't done any baking for a long time really. I think maybe 3 or 4 times a year I actually do baking. So I think I'd miss being able to make birthday cakes and things like that if it fell in that 2 months of not having any money. But I think then in that case I should keep raw ingredients in the store cupboard just in case. So it's things like that, just on the hawk, being able to do those things. Another thing I'd miss if we had no money, because we'd have to think about these things, was to be able, well, that would also be about the electricity. And then there's keeping warm in the winter, if it was in the winter that we had no money, because we'd need the heating and we'd have to minimize the amount of heating that we use. So it would be just the ability to turn on the heating when things get really cold. But it forces me to think about the things, like I said before, about windproofing doors and windows and keeping warm, airing the house, and then hot water bottles, things like that. So putting those things in there helps me to preempt and then plan what I'll do instead of those things, should we need to. And then I wrote a list of the things we would not be able to do without, or wouldn't want to do without. Now, I was to think of in terms of basics, right? Now, I haven't even finished the list because it's quite long. So I thought of things like, as far as food goes, for myself, not so much. I wouldn't bother with the milk much or the cheese, but I would miss my soya milk. But the family would miss the milk and the cheese. We'd all miss the peanut butter. Eggs, I could live without. However, if not getting any meat at all, I think our family would still want some eggs, even though we don't really have much meat anyway, and eggs we don't have much anyway. But just having them there, I think, is a relief. Flour, definitely flour, because I do make breads. So yeah, being able to have the ingredients for bread. Tinned tomatoes is such a savior when you're having to do store cupboard foods, like all your pulses and things like that. It's such a savior, because especially if I'm with my autistic grandson, who is very limited palate, and he loves these bolognese and lasagna and things like that, and tinned tomatoes and passata, that's a staple for my cupboard. So I think I'd have to stock up on things like that. Cinnamon. Man, can cinnamon tart up and lift the soul if you're on basic stuff. Cinnamon, sugar and salt. Now the sugar and the salt we don't use much of. It's very rarely ever used actually, except in hot drinks. And even then it's only my husband and my son really that use it, and that's my husband, so sugar lasts us a long time. However, it's one of those things, like now I've made jam for the first time in a long time. But if we were to preserve our own things, and I did make a batch of jam every year, I would have to have sugar as a backup just in case. It's a good preservative naturally. And salt as well. We don't add much salt to anything. I use stock instead, but if I ever had to preserve things, sometimes salt would be a good thing to have. So I just would like to have a little, and we don't use I use the sea salt, and I do have the Himalayan pink sea salt. I'm struggling to get used to the flavor of that, but I have it and I will get used to it. But I will have a stock of that, not much, just enough for just in case. It's also a good disinfectant as well. And then other things I would miss were seeds and nuts if I couldn't get them. So these are things I need to figure out getting into my store cupboard. So the seeds we use the most of is the sunflower seeds, both for sprouting and for eating or toasting. I love, or adding to breads or crumbles or things like that. Almonds are a backup for me. I like to have almonds. We like to have them toasted or chopped up and soaked and then put into mueslis or things like that. Not so much to snack on as much as we used to, because I now know that we need to soak them before eating them raw, and that tastes delicious once they've soaked. It actually makes a big difference. But I also want to keep them as a backup for alternative milk in case. So I want to build up a storage of almonds for using for milk. Oils, we don't actually use much oil. We very rarely use it anymore, except for a tiny little bit for sauteing onions or something when we're making a sauce or a gravy, but I don't use oil anymore much. Oh yeah, and occasionally the popcorn. Yeah, popcorn, the seeds. We've got to get that for our store cupboard, because that is like the backup if you're wanting something naughty, snacky type thing instead of crisps. I am getting popcorn seeds. And I know you can get an air popping machine for popcorn seeds, but I don't want any more utensils in a kitchen that doesn't have space. So I'll just do it the way I always have. And that's a bit of comfort food, and that could bolster anybody when you're really, really down and don't have much. I know we can live with a great deal less, but I'm trying to do this in a healthy way and save our sanity as well. I mean, so far as food goes, I think those are the worst things that would be, because I already have a storage of pulses and some grains I have stored. So those things of the staples I already have. The vegetables, I already have loads of seeds for vegetables, and I have things in the garden. So those things I'm not too worried about. Unless, of course, we have freak weather that wipes out all our fresh fruit and veg. Then I'll be worried. So I still need to think about having, like I've done with the tomatoes, dehydrated or frozen stuff, or something like that, as backup just in case. Then for cleaning, there are a few basic things that I already have, but some things I've got the bare minimum of. I would not have a storage of. I have essential oils that would last for months. I have 6 bottles of vinegar for cleaning and disinfectant and things like that. So I have plenty of vinegar. I have plenty of soda crystals. I have plenty of bicarb and citric acid. I don't have much lemon juice, and I don't have enough soap flakes. I don't have much fabric softener, even though I'm using Ecover at the minute. I know that I could do without it. I know that we could use vinegar instead of softener, even though I don't find it very effective at all. But it is still better than nothing, and it's a disinfectant anyway in your laundry. So soap flakes, the liquid soap flakes. I haven't been able to get dried soap flakes for a while. It's very hard to get hold of, unless you probably get it online. But I have been buying liquid soap flakes, much cheaper than laundry liquid. I had used soap nuts in the past, but the only problem I have with that is they're not very good on white clothes. They kind of have a bleaching effect on white clothes, make them grey. And to me, they've travelled very many miles, because they come from, I think it's somewhere in the direction of India or somewhere like that. I have found little bags of them in the Indian food shop, but they're very expensive. It was much cheaper to get them through EcoZone, Big Green Smile actually. And that I got a big bag for £13. That's including the postage. So that was a better find. So that I use now, because I want to use things that have not travelled so far. I've been using the liquid soap flakes, liquid soap flakes, and some soda crystals for washing my laundry, and it works perfectly fine. It really does. So for cleaning, that's it. And for toiletries, what I would miss, I wouldn't be able to do without. And that is loo roll. I know for a wee I'd be able to make cloth for myself to use, but I'm sorry, I'm not doing without loo roll for a number 2. We're not ready for that kind of zero waste target just yet. So loo roll, soap or shower gel. I already have a few bars of soap, but that would never last us 2 months if we had to go without money for 2 months. So I need to build up another storage of soap, and I intend to make my own soap soon as well, but for now I need to stock up on soap. So loo roll, soap, and then toothpaste. Even though I know I have the ingredients for making my own homemade toothpaste, and I do use it, my family don't, and my husband, obviously with sensitive teeth, it's good to get him the sensitive teeth toothpaste. But I know that if we had to, I've got the ingredients and I could make my own toothpaste. So I'm not too worried about that. But those are the 3 things I just would not be able to do without of toiletries. The rest we can do. I mean, even shampoo. If you go to Fairyland Cottage YouTube channel, she has a video, an instruction video on zero waste and homemade shampoo and conditioner. And I like her recipe, especially the one she uses with chickpea flour. So I've got a storage of chickpea flour anyway, so I'm sorted for that. Oh yes, vegetable stock. My backup store cupboard, vegetable stock. I wouldn't be able to do without that. I need stock. So that's given me a clear idea of what I need to save and store up for a just in case. And that will buy me some peace of mind that even for whatever the reason, if anything pops up, like another fine for something or the other, then at least I would have the money, the storage there, and I wouldn't have to worry about food because that's taken care of, and the money that does come in could pay for things that are sudden or emergencies or important. But if there's a situation for 2 months or so at a time that we had no money at all, those are the things I know I need to put in my store cupboard and think about. So there we are. That's what I've been doing this week. It's been keeping me busy, but it's given me a direction for peace of mind. And in our lives, to be honest, I could do without the extra stress. So I'm just going to put these things in place to avoid the extra stress. So with that, I'm going to love you and leave you. Get on with spending a bit of time with my grandson. And I hope you have a lovely day. Oh, and before I go, look at these beautiful Jerusalem artichoke flowers. They're bending over now. Look at that. Oh, isn't that just beautiful for a flower, for the Jerusalem artichokes? That is just wonderful, beautiful. And they are going over now. The whole garden is looking a bit like autumn's here. Needs a little bit more tidying up and sorting, but everything under here is still growing. All right, my lovelies, speak to you again soon. Bye.